I never thought I'd be sitting in my living room, making a wager with my best friend over something as ridiculous as my sexuality. But there we were, a half-empty pizza box between us, a beer in my hand, and a smug grin on Liam's face. "I could turn you gay in a week," he said, tapping his fingers against his glass like he had already won. I scoffed, leaning back against the couch. "That's not how it works, Liam." Liam arched an eyebrow. "You sure?" His smirk deepened, teasing yet strangely certain. "Attraction isn't as rigid as you think. Maybe you just haven't met the right guy yet." I laughed, shaking my head. I knew who I was. I had been with my girlfriend, Sophie, for almost 3 years. Sure, things had settled into a routine, and maybe we weren't as passionate as we once were, but relationships weren't meant to be fireworks forever. Love was about commitment, right? "You're insane," I said, taking another sip of my beer. "But you're curious," Liam countered. "Come on, 1 week. No tricks, no setups. Just let me show you that attraction isn't always about labels. If nothing happens, you win, and I'll never bring it up again." There was no risk. I knew Liam was wrong. If anything, this would be entertaining. Maybe even a way to prove, once and for all, that my identity wasn't up for debate. "You're on," I said. I didn't tell Sophie. Not because I was hiding anything, but because she wouldn't have understood. She never particularly liked Liam. She thought he was too flirty, too reckless. Maybe she saw something in him I didn't. Liam texted me that night. Rule 1, no overthinking. Just go with it. I ignored him, but something about his confidence unsettled me. The next morning, Sophie left early for work, barely pecking me on the cheek as she went. "Dinner tonight?" I asked, watching her slip into her coat. She hesitated, tucking her hair behind her ear. "I might have to stay late again." "Rain check?" I nodded, trying not to let the disappointment show. She had been staying late a lot recently. Liam, on the other hand, showed up at my apartment with coffee and a smirk. "Day 1, and you already look lost without me." I rolled my eyes. "So what's your plan?" Flash a rainbow flag in my face and hope for the best. Liam laughed. "Nope, I'm just going to be myself. Let's see if you start seeing me differently." We spent the day together, just like we had countless times before. We got lunch at our usual spot, walked through the city, talked about everything and nothing. But something was different, and I hated that I noticed it. I started to see what Sophie must have seen in Liam. How easily he could draw people in, the way his laughter felt effortless, the quiet confidence in the way he carried himself. He was magnetic, not in a way that made me feel anything, but in a way that made me wonder how I had never noticed before. That night, Sophie came home late. I was on the couch, half watching some documentary when she walked in, tossing her bag onto the chair. "Hey," I said, muting the TV. "Hey," she echoed, forcing a smile. "Long day." "Yeah," she sighed, pulling her hair loose from its ponytail. "Just exhausted." She sat beside me, but the space between us felt vast. I reached for her hand, rubbing my thumb over her knuckles. She let me, but there was a hollowness to it. I wanted to ask if she was okay, if we were okay, but the words felt heavy, and I was tired of feeling like I was the only one trying to hold on. Instead, I just said, "Missed you today." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Me too." Liam texted me before I went to bed. Day 1. "Feeling anything yet?" I stared at the screen, then typed back. Not a chance. By the 3rd day, I started to feel something I couldn't quite place. It was an attraction, not exactly, but there was an awareness that hadn't been there before. Liam had a way of looking at me, really looking, like he was waiting for me to say something I didn't even know I wanted to say. At lunch, he asked, "What do you think makes a relationship last?" I shrugged. "Trust, probably. Commitment." No mention of love? I hesitated. Love, sure, but love fades. It has to be more than that. Liam watched me carefully. "Is that what's happening with Sophie?" I frowned. "That's not." I stopped myself. I didn't want to say it out loud. That something between us had shifted, that I felt like I was reaching for her through glass. Liam didn't press, but he didn't need to. That night, I lay in bed beside Sophie, staring at the ceiling. She was already asleep, turned away from me. I thought about how easy things used to be, how natural it had felt to touch her, kiss her, hold her without wondering if she wanted to pull away. Then, unbidden, I thought about Liam. Not in a way that scared me, but in a way that made me wonder how he had gotten into my head so easily. I turned onto my side, closing my eyes. This was just a game, and I wasn't going to lose. By the fourth day, I wasn't laughing anymore. At first, the challenge had been a joke, a ridiculous, harmless game between best friends. But something about the way Liam looked at me, the way he spoke, made me uneasy. Not because I was attracted to him. That wasn't it. It was the way he made me feel seen. Really seen. And that was something I hadn't felt in a long time. I told myself it was nothing. But nothing had started to feel like something. "You're overthinking," Liam said, stirring his coffee lazily, his eyes studying me across the table. "I'm not," I lied. "Then why are you acting weird?" He smirked. "You can't tell me you don't feel it. Something's changing." I scoffed, shaking my head. "You're imagining things." "Am I?" He leaned back, arms crossed, confident in a way that made my skin feel too tight. I wanted to argue, to shut him down, but there was something in his voice, a quiet certainty that unsettled me. Maybe because deep down, I knew he wasn't entirely wrong. It wasn't attraction, but it was something, a shift in how I saw him. A new awareness of the way his lips curved when he smiled, the way his presence seemed to pull at something inside me I didn't understand. It was unsettling. I needed to clear my head. That evening, Sophie was home before me. It should have been a good thing, but the moment I walked through the door, I felt the distance between us like a cold draft. She was on the couch, scrolling through her phone, barely looking up. "Hey," I said, dropping my keys onto the table. "Hey," she murmured, distracted. I sat beside her, stretching my arm along the back of the couch, waiting for her to put her phone down. She didn't. "You want to watch something?" I tried. Her thumbs kept moving. "Sophie." She glanced at me, finally noticing the frustration in my voice. "What?" I hesitated. "Never mind." I wasn't sure what I had expected. I didn't even know what I wanted. But I felt like I was talking to a stranger, like I was sitting next to a ghost of the woman I used to love. I went to bed early, leaving her on the couch. But I couldn't sleep. Liam texted me close to midnight. "You up?" I stared at the screen for a moment before replying. "Yeah." A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. "Incoming call." I answered, pressing it to my ear. "What do you want?" Liam chuckled. "Why you sound so grumpy?" I sighed. "Just tired." There was a pause, then his voice softened. "You okay?" The question caught me off guard. "Yeah," I said automatically. "You sure?" I wasn't, but I didn't know how to explain that. For a moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear the faint sounds of traffic on his end, the occasional rustle of movement. "I think Sophie's cheating on me," I said suddenly. I hadn't meant to say it. I hadn't even admitted it to myself before now. Liam didn't respond right away. When he finally did, his voice was careful. "Why do you think that?" "She's distant," I muttered. "Always busy, always distracted. Feels like she's just not here anymore." Liam exhaled. "Maybe there's an explanation." "Maybe." I swallowed. "But if I asked, and she lied, I don't think I'd want to know." There was another pause, heavier this time. "That's a dangerous place to be, man." I rubbed a hand over my face. "Yeah." Silence stretched between us. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was grounding. Then Liam said, "You deserve to be wanted, you know?" I let out a hollow laugh. "You trying to win the bet?" He chuckled. "Not everything is about that." I wasn't sure what to say. Eventually, I murmured I should get some sleep. "All right," Liam said. "But, if you ever want to talk, you know where to find me." I hung up, staring at the ceiling in the dark. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone. And that scared me more than anything. The next morning, Sophie was already gone. A note on the kitchen counter went in early. "Have a good day." No heart. No extra words. Just a note that felt like a formality. I threw it in the trash. Liam and I met up later that day, and something between us felt different. Maybe it was because of last night. Maybe because I was finally allowing myself to admit that I was drawn to him. Not in a way I understood, but in a way I couldn't ignore. We sat at a cafe, the air buzzing with conversation around us. Liam tapped his fingers on the table. So? So what? Are you still convinced nothing's changing?" I met his gaze, steady and unshaken. "Yes." Liam studied me for a long moment. Then, slowly he smiled. Not teasing, not cocky, just knowing. He didn't argue. He didn't push. He just leaned back in his chair and said, "All right." And somehow, that was worse than if he had tried to convince me, because it meant he was waiting, and part of me wondered what would happen if I stopped resisting. By the sixth day, the rules no longer felt like they mattered. When Liam had first made the bet, I'd been so sure of myself, so confident that nothing he did could change the way I saw him. But now, I wasn't so sure of anything. My relationship with Sophie felt like a dying ember, barely giving off any warmth, while Liam's presence was something else entirely, steady, insistent, pulling me towards something I didn't understand. I told myself I wasn't doing anything wrong, but I also knew that if I had to keep justifying it, maybe I wasn't as innocent as I wanted to believe. It started with a drink. Liam had texted me that afternoon. "One more night before the week's up. Drinks?" I hesitated before replying. Sure. Sophie hadn't come home the night before. She claimed she'd been too exhausted and crashed at a coworker's place, but I didn't believe her. I didn't even have the energy to be angry. I just felt hollow. Maybe that was why I didn't think twice before showing up at Liam's apartment that night. A bottle of whiskey between us, the air thick with something neither of us wanted to name. "You seem tense," Liam said, pouring me another drink. I let out a humorless laugh. "You could say that. Still think I haven't gotten to you?" I looked at him, really looked at him. The sharp angles of his jaw, the way his lips curled around the rim of his glass, the way his confidence wasn't cocky tonight, just quiet, like he already knew the answer. I swallowed hard, looking away. I don't know what I think anymore. Liam didn't push. He just leaned back, watching me with those unreadable eyes. "You ever wonder what it would be like?" he asked. I frowned. "What? If you weren't so convinced you were straight?" I exhaled slowly. "Liam, relax," he said, voice smooth, easy. "I'm not asking you to do anything. I just think maybe you don't have to fight so hard to prove something that doesn't need proving." I looked down at my glass. The words felt like they should be ridiculous, but they weren't, because for the first time, I wasn't fighting. I was just sitting there, letting the weight of it all sink in, and I didn't hate it. The room was dim, the only light coming from the city outside, casting shadows against the walls. I don't know who moved first. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was him. But suddenly, the space between us was smaller than it had ever been. Liam's hand brushed mine, barely a touch, but enough to send something sharp through my chest. My breath caught. I didn't move away. His voice was barely above a whisper. "Tell me to stop." I didn't. Instead, I looked at him, my pulse hammering in my throat, my entire body tight with something I couldn't name. And then, his lips were on mine. It was slow, uncertain at first, like he was waiting for me to push him away. But I didn't, because the second it happened, I wasn't thinking about Sophie. I wasn't thinking about the bet. I was just thinking about him. The warmth of his mouth, the way his fingers curled into my shirt, the quiet sound he made when I didn't pull away. It should have felt foreign. It didn't. It felt inevitable. When I finally pulled away, I was breathless. Liam didn't speak. He just searched my face, waiting for me to say something, to define what had just happened. I couldn't. I stood abruptly, the room spinning slightly from the alcohol and the weight of what I had just done. I have to go." Liam's expression didn't change. He just nodded, like he'd expected this. "Okay." I grabbed my coat, fumbling with the buttons, my hands shaking. Before I reached the door, his voice stopped me. "I told you," Liam said softly. "It was never about winning a bet." I hesitated, my fingers tight around the doorknob. But I didn't look back. I couldn't, because I knew if I did, I wouldn't leave. When I got home, Sophie was asleep. I stood in the doorway of our bedroom, watching the slow rise and fall of her breathing. She looked peaceful, unaware of the storm raging inside me. I could crawl into bed beside her. Pretend the night never happened. Pretend I was still the same person I had been a week ago. But I wasn't. I quietly walked to the bathroom, gripping the sink as I stared at myself in the mirror. My lips were still swollen, my heartbeat still uneven. I turned on the faucet, splashing cold water onto my face. Then I looked at myself again, waiting for the guilt to hit. It didn't, and that was the worst part, because deep down I knew I wasn't sorry. The next morning, the world hadn't ended. That was the first thing I noticed. The sky was still blue. The city still hummed outside my window. My phone still sat on the nightstand, screen dark and silent. But something inside me had changed. I could still feel it. The ghost of Liam's lips against mine, the way my body had leaned into his without hesitation, the way I hadn't felt guilt, only clarity. I should have felt sick. I should have been scrambling to rationalize it, to shove it into a box labeled mistake and bury it under everything I thought I knew about myself. But I wasn't sure it was a mistake, and that terrified me. Sophie was already in the kitchen when I walked out of the bedroom. She looked up from her coffee, her eyes flicking over me like she was searching for something. "Did you come in late?" she asked. I hesitated. "Yeah, stayed out with Liam." She nodded like she expected that answer. I poured myself a cup of coffee, my back to her. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. We had been dancing around something for weeks, both of us pretending, both of us lying in different ways. I turned to face her. "Sophie." She looked up, startled by the weight in my voice. I almost said it, almost admitted that something had shifted, that I wasn't the same person she thought I was, that I had kissed my best friend and I didn't regret it. But then I saw it, the flicker of guilt in her eyes, the slight shift of her shoulders, like she was bracing for something. I didn't have to ask. I already knew. "You don't have to lie," I said quietly. Her fingers tightened around her coffee mug. "What are you talking about?" I let out a slow breath. "I know, Sophie." Her expression cracked for a fraction of a second, barely enough to register, but enough for me to see the truth. She looked away. "It's not what you think." I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "It never is, right?" Silence. She didn't deny it. That was all the confirmation I needed. I had spent so much time questioning myself, wondering if I was the one who was broken, if I was the one ruining us. But now, standing in the kitchen with the weight of both of our betrayals hanging between us, I realized the truth. We had already been over long before last night. Neither of us had wanted to say it out loud. Until now. Sophie sighed, running a hand through her hair. "I never meant to hurt you." I stared at her, at the woman I had built a life with, and felt nothing. Not anger, not heartbreak, just exhaustion. "I know," I said. Her lips parted slightly, like she had expected a fight. I could have given her one. I could have yelled, accused, demanded explanations that wouldn't change anything. But I didn't want to, because the truth was I wasn't innocent either. And maybe this was the most honest we had been with each other in years. Sophie exhaled shakily. "So what now?" I set my coffee down. "I think we both know the answer." She looked away, blinking rapidly. For a second, I thought she might cry. But she didn't. And neither did I. Because deep down, we both knew. This wasn't heartbreak. This was relief. I didn't go to Liam's apartment right away. I walked. For hours. Through streets I had walked 100 times before, but everything felt different now. Sharper, clearer, like I was seeing it all for the first time. At some point, my phone buzzed. "You okay?" "Liam." I stared at the message, thumb hovering over the keyboard. I could lie. Say I was fine. That everything was normal. Or I could stop lying. To him, to myself. I typed 2 words. "Not really." 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Then, "Want to come over?" I hesitated, staring at the screen. Then, before I could think too hard about it, I typed, "Eh." I turned around, heading toward the only place that made sense. Toward the person who had made me question everything. The person who, deep down, I had always known the answer to.